So to get us started today, I'm going to hand over to Anne from Home for All. So Anne, the floor is yours, and I think you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you, Robbie, and I will just try and share the screen here. And also apologize if I have some background noise because just this moment they started building on a construction site right next to us, so that's perfect timing. But I hope you can hear me all right and the sound is okay. Otherwise, please bear with me. As Robbie said, I'm Anna and I'm Program Manager in Home for All, which is a national coalition to end youth homelessness in Denmark. We've existed for about 5-6 years now, and we now count 20 national partners across sectors. That's housing organizations, it's municipalities, it's government institutions, it's civil society organizations and service providers in this coalition, and philanthropical foundations also, working together to end youth homelessness. And I am a part of the small backbone secretariat or backbone office of 4 members of staff, where we support these 20 partners in their work and their aim to end homelessness. So just need to say that we are not working as a service provider. We don't run services for young people with young people in homelessness. We're working with the service providers in the municipality who's actually doing the support and providing housing for young people with in homelessness. Just to give you a bit of background information about the situation in Denmark, then 3 years ago was the last time that we had a national registration of people in homelessness in Denmark. And at that time, this registration showed that there were 2,000 young people in Denmark. We have a total population of about 5 million people. So 2,000 young people between 18 and 29 years old are living in homelessness in Denmark in a specific week where this registration is made. Most of these young people are sofa surfing or living in shelters. 8% of them are living in the street, so it's mainly sofa surfing and shelters, as I'm sure is the case in many of your countries as well when it comes to young people and homelessness. This number was actually a 72% increase in the number of young people in homelessness counted over the past 10 years. So it's quite a massive increase in the number of young people experiencing homelessness in Denmark. And this was actually the starting point, this high rising curve that started the coalition back in 2016. Another piece of background information that I think you should know about, because this is actually an important part of the context of the youth collaboration and participation work that we started focusing on 2 years ago. It is that in 2020 to 2021, the national government had to make a new strategy to end homelessness or handle homelessness in Denmark. So during the past 2 years, there's been a massive political focus in spite of COVID and all of the other things that's been happening during these years. Then there's been a strong focus on how to revise this strategy and this way of working with homelessness in Denmark. So there's a political focus over the past 2 years, and we as a coalition of national partners obviously had our eyes very focused on this development of the strategy and tried to influence it as much as we could. We advocated for a strategy that was built on housing first, and that for the first time combined social and housing policies in the ways that we are addressing homelessness among young people and people in general. And there was actually huge credit for the government that they were really focusing on involving all the stakeholders in the field in this working with the national strategy to end homelessness. But there was one perspective that we found was missing. in this work, and that was the perspectives of young adults with lived expertise. So young adults who had experienced homelessness when they were younger, who were experiencing homelessness right now, but not really a part of the stakeholders involved in this quite solid work with this new strategy. And at the same time, in our coalition, we've had a core principle from day one saying that, and this is a translation of the Danish saying, I couldn't make it better in English, so I don't know if it sounds all right, but we were saying that the ones we're talking about should be talking themselves. That's been like a core principle of our work in the coalition since day one. But we also have to admit and say that we have not been doing it enough at all in practice. It's been a principle, but in reality, we've not been very good at it. We've done different activities, and I'll get back to that, but not been doing it enough. What we have done is, I can explain that by looking at this continuum of participation, which is like different types of participation and collaboration. None is better than the other, but each type of participation or collaboration works for different situations. But when we looked at that, we thought, well, we have been very good at acknowledging that young people with lived expertise have important perspectives and are important stakeholders when it comes to ending homelessness. But we're not, what we have mainly been doing is that they've been represented in our work by others, by service providers, by social workers, by people who are working closely with the young people. But they haven't been represented themselves enough in our work in the coalition. Or we've been interviewing young people, doing very classic qualitative interviews with young people where they've had the opportunity to express their opinion. And then we have brought their opinion into different settings, meetings and publications, etc. But what we haven't been very good at is giving young people access to actually create change, to actually be a part of the change and participate in that. So that was one of the things that we wanted to kind of push ourselves towards with our new focus on being better at youth collaboration and participation. I think some of the reasons why we've not done that enough and why we've not done enough youth participation and collaboration has been a lot of barriers that thinking that recruiting young people for this process and for meetings and for participation is very difficult, very time consuming, and it's very difficult to find anyone to say yes. It takes time and resources, and often I find, I don't know if you can recognize that, often when we involve young people, then it's one young person who is representing his own story or own case in a meeting, and that becomes the truth. But the representation of more perspectives and more young people's experiences have been lacking a bit. And then also finding that sometimes when young people do participate in meetings, their perspective becomes the truth and not one perspective among other perspectives in a meeting of stakeholders. So no one is actually daring to disagree with the young person with lived expertise, and that's not equal participation and collaboration. Then it just becomes someone being there. So lots of reasons why we've sometimes chosen to do something else that we should have done, basically. Now, just to check in with you, I was curious to find out, how does this correspond with your own experience of participation and collaboration? What do you consider your biggest barriers to youth collaboration and participation? If you could just like write a few words and chat about that, just to find out where you are. And then I can see if I can open the chat here. Or Robbie, you might be able to see the chat. And
you can't see the chat? I can, I can read out if you can't see them. So Martin has said access and interest, the accessibility. I would also add for myself complex language. You know, bureaucratic systems, administration systems, sometimes the language they use is totally bizarre, even to me who works in the sector. Young people knowing where to go for help, motivation, buy-in. There's a few coming in. Bringing young people together, but keeping confidentiality. Getting more than one perspective. Someone or two people often turn up, which doesn't give a full picture, which I guess comes back to what you were saying earlier. The sharing of real power can be a challenge, fear of the feedback. So I guess handing over power to some young people. Reaching out to the most vulnerable groups of young people. And similarly to you, trying to recruit young people, as we do not provide direct services, but you represent service providers. So again, tapping into those.
So it sounds like it's very familiar barriers that you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that's what kept us from doing participation and collaboration enough. I have to say we were doing it, but we don't think we were doing it good enough or well enough. So what did we do back in 2020 in the middle of COVID, or when there was just like the break of COVID in Denmark? We decided to collaborate with some consultants who developed a really interesting method of participation and co-creating knowledge with young people with lived expertise. So we started a process that lasted about 9 months, I think, first. We started this in 2021, and the first thing we did was we started recruiting young people for a storytelling weekend. So it was recruiting them for a very concrete event or a very concrete camp. And we recruited the young people by contacting, because one of you was saying as well, we're not a service provider, we don't have the direct contact with the young people ourselves. So we use our network of service providers, of municipalities, of civil society organizations, and we ask them to send an invitation to young people in their network who they thought might be interested in using their experiences to make things better for the next generation. Not in their own case, but making things better for the future of young people who might be in risk of homelessness. And that recruitment, I think it lasted about a month to get in touch with young people. And what we actually found was there was a lot of social workers who knew a lot of young people who they thought would be interested in participating. And the social workers contacted us and they said, I have this is an example, I have this young man, he would really love to contribute, but being on a weekend for more than 24 hours with a group of young people that he doesn't know, that's too much, that won't happen. And said, well, that's okay. He can share his story and his experience in another way, but if we could contact him and have a conversation with him and talk about how we want to join, then we'll sort something out. And in many cases, it actually turned out that these young people, when they heard that what we wanted to do was to invite them in to say for more than 24 hours, basically spending from Saturday to Sunday with a group of young people who had experienced homelessness and sharing stories, they said, oh, that sounds cool, I'd like that. So some of the barriers that we faced in recruitment was actually the people working closely with the young people who thought that the young people wouldn't want to participate, but actually they did want to participate. And some of the young people didn't want to participate in a weekend, and then we collected their stories in a different way. But actually, that was there was a barrier. We thought spending an entire weekend together, that's not going to happen. That's not possible for this group of young people, but it was. Then we had this 24 hours together in a hostel. So we were in a hostel, having a camp, having dinner together, and the people who wanted to could stay in the hostel as well overnight, where the young people were sharing stories. Actually, they were starting out by pointing towards what they thought was important that other people knew about being a young person and experiencing homelessness. What was the most important thing that other people knew about this situation? And then they collected these themes that they found out, and then they started sharing bits and pieces of their story, not their full life story, but bits and pieces of their stories with each other. And afterwards, they looked at the stories they'd heard, and they themselves, the young people themselves, said, so what do our stories have in common? What are the themes we want to discuss further tomorrow on day 2? So this was a way of actually not interviewing young people and then as researchers going back to the office and then analyzing and finding out what did they have in common, these stories, what were the themes and the topics. We were actually doing the analysis with the young people. So they were pointing towards 4 themes that they thought was important that other people knew about being a young person and in homelessness, and also what would have helped me better if anyone had provided me with this. And these themes and these stories, we took them to a meeting with the young people with lived expertise, and a group of researchers and a group of front worker staff or social workers who were working with young people. And we had calling this dialogue. It's a dialogue meeting where the researchers and the social workers were kind of bringing their perspectives into these themes. And afterwards, we collected everything and we created a publication to be communicated and sent out to all the important stakeholders. And we followed up by a campaign, that was a social media campaign, but also a media campaign with these young people with lived expertise. And then that publication was actually published a bit over a year ago. But since then, we've managed to keep continuous engagement with about 6 or 7 of these young people who participated in the storytelling weekend, and that was about 12 or 15, I think, young people participating in this weekend. So about half of them were still engaged in our work after that weekend, and are now just started working with True Colours United, as you said, Robbie, because this process has been very structured and facilitated by us in Home for All. But now we are gradually giving more and more of the organizing power and the leadership role to this group of young people who then wants to engage and mobilize more young people in their work and maybe collecting more young people's stories in their work. So that's what we're doing with True Colours United now. So that's kind of an overview of the process that we started 2 years ago. And just to give you an idea of what happened at this weekend, that was the starting point. This is a few pictures of the work. So it's not sitting down doing interviews, it's actually having a camp and workshop with these young people where they decide what is important to take away from this workshop. So the results, was it worth it? I have to say it was, don't I, in this training session. And it definitely was. I think we gained more from this process than we thought possible. I don't know, can you see my cursor here when I'm moving that around?
Yes, yes, I can.
Yes, you can. All right. Well, first of all, this was the publication that came out. it's called End Youth Homelessness, Young People's Experience, that was sent out to all the politicians who were negotiating and forming a new strategy to end homelessness. And obviously it was sent out to loads of stakeholders as well. But also 3 of the young people who participated in this process, they wanted to write a chronicle for a newspaper. So they did that after being a part of this storytelling workshop. And they didn't just tell their own stories in this chronicle. They actually managed to, what they wanted to write about was some of the reflections they had by listening to other young people's stories as well. So they were representing more than their own individual perspective. They were representing of other young people's stories as well in their communication afterwards. So we helped them write this chronicle and brought it in, that was brought in a national newspaper. And this chronicle led to an interview, TV interview. And this is a young man called Simon. He'd been a part of the process from the beginning. He was interviewed on national TV in the same evening and this chronicle was brought. And this is an important guy because that's the Minister of Housing in Denmark. And we had, in Home for All, tried to get him into the conversation about homelessness for a very long time. And we have not succeeded because we thought if we are to end homelessness, we need housing policies involved as well. But this chronicle written by young people on homelessness led to an interview where we for the first time saw the Minister of Housing talking about homelessness on national TV. So that was a big breakthrough for us in a conversation with this young person. The young people, they also met our Minister of Social Affairs, who got the publication and who had a conversation with them about what's important when we are forming this new strategy, what's important to know. And this led to, and there were meetings with the politicians who were forming and negotiating the policies as well. And this actually led to an invitation to meet the entire team in the Ministry of Social Affairs who were writing and forming the proposal of the new strategy. So there was a group of 5 young people who spent an hour and a half with the team in the Ministry of Social Affairs, providing their perspectives, but also bringing to the table the perspectives of the other young people who participated, but who were not present at this meeting. And this actually had an impact because it led to some revised chapters and some new perspectives and some new content in the proposal that was later published by the government, the national government, to this strategy. So it had direct impact on what that proposal said. And down here you might recognize Coco's face here from yesterday. That was actually 2 weeks ago, where this group of young people had a vision and mission and strategy workshop with the good people from True Colours United, now beginning to shape and organize and take leadership of the youth collaboration and participation perspective and work here in Home for All. So I think the starting point of this storytelling workshop and focusing on that has actually taken us on a path that I'm not sure I would never have thought that we would be here today with a group of young people who now want to be more and more self-organized, and that's really interesting. So we've moved towards, I think, looking at this continuum, we've moved more and more towards young people, giving young people access to create actual change, not by creating actual activities yet, but they had the experience of being invited into forums with decision makers that they had never had access to before, and they actually experienced being listened to by these decision makers, politicians and the ministries and stakeholders in the field as well. So that was important. And just to wrap up, I think the lessons that we learned from this was that the barrier I mentioned earlier, that they don't want to participate. It's really difficult to recruit young people for this type of process. Are they motivated? What's the point? The young adults, they really do want to participate and collaborate. we had more young people wanting to participate than actually participated because they couldn't join that weekend, etc. So I think the interest was bigger than I thought it was. Obviously, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources, but saying that they don't want to participate, that is, in my opinion and my experience now, wrong. And I think that storytelling weekend where the young people were moving from individual stories, listening to each other's stories, and then shaping themes rather than being case stories and bringing them into publication, then actually talking about themes they thought was important, was a chance to move from individual to collective stories. And that positioned the young people differently when they attended meetings, when they were meeting politicians and ministries, because they could say, that idea wouldn't work for me, but I know that there was another guy in the session and it worked really well for him. So it was showing like that the young people are not the same. It's not just one truth, but they have different perspectives, and that this gave them a chance to represent more than their own perspective. And I think what we saw was that young adults can influence policy, because they went from not being a central stakeholder to actually being heard and involved in this process. And I think now that we are obliged, we have this 6 young people, and they actually said to us after this national strategy was negotiated and that work was done, then they said to us, now what? We want to contribute more. And we didn't have the answer to that. We don't know now what. But let's talk about what you would like to do. And now I think we're obliged to support them and lucky enough to be able to work with True College United and doing that, to support them in strengthening the participation collaboration now. So that's where we're moving forward, and we're not there yet, but that's where we're moving towards now. Thank you. So any questions or comments? Robbie, you are in charge.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was a fantastic presentation. I might ask you to end the share screen just so we can bring everybody back. Perfect. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions that they want to put to Anne? You can put them into the chat box. You can raise your hand and ask it directly. I actually have a first question. It was something you mentioned at the start of your presentation around sometimes when you bring young people into the process, or you bring one young person into the process, their story becomes the truth. And it's difficult in a meeting to challenge that if from your service provider or social worker or civil society or agency. Can you discuss a bit what you meant by that? Because I can see definitely it becomes more about the collective from the path that you went on, but I'm interested to know what you meant in the very beginning.
But I think our experience is that sometimes, often, if we have like a conference or a panel or just a meeting, and you have this one young person with lived expertise expressing an opinion, then no one disagrees. But we know that other stakeholders in the room actually might disagree with this person, but no one dares to disagree with the lived experience or challenge or bringing a new perspective. And to me, that is not equal. That is not equal participation. I mean, we're all bringing different perspectives into the room as service providers, as foundations, as housing organizations, and as young people with lived expertise. And I think obviously that is a matter of facilitation as well, but it's also a matter of, and I think Coco and True Colors might have talked about that yesterday, of training everyone else in the room in positioning the young person equally with the rest of the people in the room. Did that make sense or answer your question?
No,
I don't know if you've experienced in a plenary or panel discussion in a conference and the microphone is handed over for the young person. And
the time.
then tell me your story and what do you think we should do differently. And then the conversation kind of continues among the rest of the participants. And the young person perspective, it's not challenged, it's not brought into the conversation, it's not agreed with, it's just kind of there on its own. And that's not bringing a perspective into a new perspective into the conversation.
Perfect. No, that perfectly answers that. But Matea, before I come to you, I see you have your hand raised, but there was a question in the box first from Martin McKee around how did you manage the co-analysis of themes with the young people? As a researcher, I know that must have thrown up challenges.
I think how we managed to do it was basically that they were telling bits of their stories, and they were looking at their stories, and they were saying, so what is the common? What do we have in common in these stories? And then they agreed on what does that point towards? What kind of theme does that point towards? And then they had lots of themes, lots and lots of themes. And then they had to prioritize. So what are the most important topics and themes that came out from your stories that we need to move on with? And then also important to say, this is not like scientific research. This is a co-creation of research with the young people with lived expertise. It's not scientific, if that makes sense.
Does that answer your question, Martin? I see some nods, great. Matea, you had a question next.
Yeah, actually I have two. Hi.
I find it difficult to hear. I cannot hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
Can you hear me a bit better now?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So I have two questions, and I was wondering, since you really nicely presented, like the learnings you had throughout this process and everything. So firstly, I was wondering if you would now to start this process again, would there be anything you would change, like having all of these learnings that happened in the process? So that's one. And secondly, as you talked about this continuous engagement, so I was just wondering, do you already have some concrete next steps or some proposals or the area where you would then develop this further on? Thank you.
Well, there's definitely some things that I would like to change. I'm not sure how I would do it differently, but I would like to do it differently. And that is actually the meeting after the storytelling weekend. The meeting where we brought researchers and professionals into the room with the young people with lived expertise. That meeting was challenged by COVID hitting Denmark again, so country was shut down and we had to do this online. That was possible. It was better than not doing it, but it would definitely have been better doing it physically. But that's not something I could change. That was just the circumstances. But what I did think we did not manage to do well enough was to actually move forward in the conversation between the professionals and the researchers and the young people. I don't think we definitely got new knowledge, we got new perspectives, but I think we could have worked even more and better with that meeting next time. And then the young people, they also attended a meeting with the partners in our coalition, and that was online as well with the same challenges. And I think doing that again, I would have probably given the young people a even more central role in that meeting, and perhaps having kind of testing a bit of like listening positions and talking positions where the young people were talking and the partners were listening. I think I would have given more time to that type of process next time. So I think the recruitment and storytelling weekend, I'm not sure I would have changed much there, but then the meetings where young people were brought, bringing their perspectives in with the professionals and the researchers and our partners. I would like to work more on that. The second question, the continuous engagement. You're saying what our concrete next steps are or have been. And that is where it is very difficult to be a facilitator who is normally doing time schedules and activity plans and action plans and etc. And actually trying to sit on my hands and do that with the young people instead, and letting them take charge of this process. So what we have concretely is that the young people said that they'd like to meet up with True Colours United again twice to talk more about how to organize, how to work as a group, and how to engage more young people in their work to create change. And then we will have to look at how can we support that. Do we need to look for some funding, some extra resources to help the young people actually take leadership and organize themselves. So really trying to follow what the young people are asking, and also helping them to shape a strategy and think strategically about their work. Yeah. Did that answer the question? Yeah.
Perfect. Does anyone have any other questions for the moment? Lisa, your hand is raised.
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Anne. My question is maybe a practical type question, and I'm thinking about it. Sounds so interesting to do that weekend, that residential piece, and I've done training before in a residential setting, and it does bring a whole new element and intimacy to the training and to that storytelling. And I would imagine that the stories that are being told, given that they're the experiences of homelessness, can be very sad and can be filled with trauma. And I was just wondering, what kind of things did you put in place to make it a safe space around, number one, sharing those very intimate stories of trauma, but also then about protecting the young people from vicarious trauma, from hearing just repeated stories of sadness. So if you had any tips of how to create that safe space for that to happen.
Well, first of all, we started the weekend. It was small groups. They were in two groups of 6 young people in each group, and we started the weekend by making some house rules, or rules of engagement, or what you would call them in English, with the young people. So how are we going to act and be together during the next 2 days to make it safe and comfortable for everyone to share their stories? And that was then shaped with the young people, but we also brought in some things that we thought it was important to say, because maybe the young people didn't think about it as well. And then we made a framework saying, if anyone feels like they need to catch a breath or go for a cigarette or just go for a walk outside, it was in November, it was raining, so that wasn't really happening. No one was outside, but just take a walk and wander in the hostel. Please do so. So feel whatever you need to do, you just do it. One of the attendees asked beforehand, she came from a different city outside of away from Copenhagen. She asked if she could bring her boyfriend, because that would make her feel safe, knowing he was not participating in the group. He was just wandering about in the hostel, but he was there, so she could go out and have a hug if she needed that. And then we also said to everyone, if anything, when you leave this weekend, if anything comes up, then please do contact us, and then we can help you find someone to talk to if you need someone to talk to, or we can have a conversation, a cup of coffee. Some of the young people, we had a phone call with everyone before the weekend to try and find out what do we need to be aware of in order to make this a good experience for you. So we've actually asked them as well beforehand. And some of the young people met with the facilitators that we work with for a cup of coffee to feel safe, because then they'd seen a face before. They knew that there would be a familiar face before they attended this weekend. So, so those were kind of the things that we tried to set up to make it safe. And then also we transcribed their stories that for the further process for the dialogue meetings, but we didn't use any stories unless they were approved by the young people afterwards. So we didn't send any stories for anything or anyone. Obviously they were anonymous, but we didn't use them for anything unless we had a clear go from the young people beforehand. And then if I can just add one thing, I think most of the young people attending were either in a process moving out of homelessness. Only 2 were in very chaotic situations at the moment, but the rest of them, it was experience that was in the past, a few years back. And I don't think that was a problem because they had different perspectives on their stories because they'd actually gotten out of homelessness and they saw what kind of find their way out. There's still lots of trouble, but I think that's different from being in the middle of chaos right now, that you have kind of a distance. It was a few years back.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have a question they want to put to Anna? If not, then I'll hand over to Lisa. So Lisa, the floor is yours.
Let's hope so. So I'm going to try and share a screen. Don't have Robbie, it doesn't look like I have the ability to share a screen. Oh, and I have it.
Sorry. Okay, perfect. Great.
So can you guys see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to start by quickly introducing myself. My name is Lisa O'Brien, and I work for Focus Ireland, which is a national charity here in Ireland working with people who are homeless. So we have a range of different services that we provide, including an advocacy department and services for adults, housing first for adults, education services, and also youth services. And I'm the manager for the youth services in the Southeast. I'm also involved with Fianza Youth, which is how I think I ended up here and how I ended up doing this participation piece with my teams last year. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is something that's a little bit more niche, and it is about how we try to engage young people at a grassroots level in what we call an annual service review. But very quickly to say before we do that, as an organisation nationally, we have a number of initiatives that would be participation or collaboration. So we do, every couple of years, we do an overall survey for all of our customers across the country. Customers is a terminology that we use for anybody who's using our service. And that recently has been conducted with the help of some peer researchers. We also, in the last couple of years, have created a new LEAP ambassador program, which is a program for that was put out for people who have had lived experiences and then becoming ambassadors for the issue around homelessness and some of the things that we've spoken about before. But what I'm talking about here is about young people participating in the actual service reviews of the service that they engaged in. And just to say that this had not happened before, and we were thinking about it before, about how we did it. And every time we thought about it and then we said, not quite yet, or we don't really do we have a set of guidelines? Do we have a policy or a procedure that will provide us the guidelines to do it? And we didn't. And then I guess we just decided, let's give it a go, because we think it's really important, and we might have to, if we're waiting for set rules and guidelines, we might be waiting for a very long time. So let's do it the other way around and try and give it a go and see what we can do. So just for you to have an understanding, an annual service review is a formal meeting that happens for every service within the organization, and it follows an agenda, and there's a formal written report on the annual service review that goes to our board of directors, and it's used to shape the planning for the services into the next year, into the following year. Some of the topics that we might discuss would be trends within the service, would be some of the challenges that we have in the service, would be some of the innovations that we've come up with in the year, would be some of the issues that have presented to us in the year. So that's just to give you an idea of the meeting. The participants of the meeting would be the manager of the service and the staff traditionally. And this year we wanted to invite young people. So some of the things that we were considering, or some of the things that we were conscious of when we were talking about this, was that it wasn't COVID and during lockdown, so it was going to be an online meeting. So that was something we needed to consider. How are we going to engage with everybody online? The fact that we didn't have any experience of, and I'm using the whole way through this presentation, you'll see the word participation. And if I was giving this presentation tomorrow, I would definitely change that word, because I heard yesterday about the importance of language and collaboration, and I thought that was really interesting. So I would definitely change that. But it was our first, we were quite inexperienced in the formal work meeting. And so we were nervous of it. And certainly as a manager and as a facilitator of the meeting, I will admit, nervous about it. We were looking at tokenism and obviously avoiding it. So we talked about that. And I thought that, Anne, you spoke really, really well about including young people, but including them as equals. And how do you do that? And I suppose we were even a step behind that, and just of how are we just saying, oh, what would you like to say? And then, great, fantastic, we've included the young people. So how do we make it really meaningful? Inclusivity was really about, we often, when we put out a call to young people to get involved with different things, often the more confident young people will come forward, the young people who maybe are settled in their lives at that moment. So how do we include not just those people, but all of the young people? So how do we include the shyer young people, or the young people who might still be in chaos, or the young people who find it challenging to communicate to authorities, all of those things? How do we include everybody in a way that's safe for everybody? Then another thing that we were worried about was the expectations of the young people. So if we're inviting the young people to come into our meeting and our review and to give us their opinions on how things can be better, that they don't have an expectation that because they told us that something should get better, that it wouldn't necessarily be better the next year. So there might be some things or ideas that they would have that are not controllable by us. So for example, more housing. While we're striving really hard to have more housing, that's maybe not something that we can achieve in a year or that we can do ourselves. Or they might want major changes to a structure or a policy, and that might not be possible. We might need to take steps towards it, but it might not be possible. So how do you manage the expectation? Because we didn't want young people to go away then feeling that that wasn't worthwhile because they didn't listen to what I said, because they didn't do it. The confidentiality of the meeting as well was something. The meeting is a place where we do talk about challenges and trends, and sometimes those challenges can be in relation to other stakeholders. So there could be maybe difficult persons or difficult relationships with stakeholders that we name or talk about within the meeting. There could be issues in relation to, say, funding bodies, etc. So how do we discuss those issues and maintain the confidentiality of the meeting? How do we, and I suppose that when I even say that and talking about it, that also poses a challenge to how do we manage that confidentiality with our staff, and why are we thinking about it differently when we're inviting young people? And I think I'm also very conscious of Paul's comment yesterday about how we're seeing this through the lens of our services and not through the lens of the young people. And I'm quite conscious this whole presentation is through the lens of services. But going back to our consideration, right, at that point in time, we were thinking, how do we make sure that if we have a young person in the meeting and we're talking about something, that it doesn't go outside of the meeting? And then just what Anne spoke of there, how do we create a safe space for everyone? So how do we create it to be safe for the young people, but equally, how do we create it to be a safe space for the staff? Because we're aware, we're asking people to be critical of our service. And within that, that's not always easy to hear that criticism if you're working really hard. It might also be if there was kind of issues, interpersonal issues between, say, customers and staff, and the young people are telling us about that. How do we make that space safe for everybody at that meeting? So they were the considerations. So before I go into what we did, what I would like to do or invite you to do is to go into breakout rooms that Robbie's going to organize, and to thinking about those considerations, and also thinking about the meeting that we were inviting young people to collaborate in. What kind of opportunities do you have in your context, in your day-to-day work, in the work that you do, that you might be able to invite young people to collaborate in? And what would you do, taking into consideration all of those things? So what kind of things could you, or what things could you put in place that would negate or that might create some of those safe spaces? So Anne gave us some ideas. What kind of things could you do that would maybe help to ensure the confidentiality? What kind of things could you do to ensure that you're including young people? So just to take a couple of minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and if you could in your groups appoint a spokesperson and share what your thoughts were afterwards, that would be great. So Robbie, you might break out the groups if that's okay.
Perfect. I've the group's done up, and I've tried to divide people so we don't have too many organizations again, bit by bit.
Or else I scared everybody off and they're just all gone.
No, I can see on my screen the room, so I can see like some of them are finishing up, and then there are some of them that are coming back. Here we go. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, Lisa, back to you.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you had enough time and not too much time to look at what you're doing. Could I ask the first group just to give us some feedback of what happened in your group?
That was us, wasn't it?
Go on, though, Paul. Start us off.
That's you, Dean. That's you.
Yeah, I don't really know if I'm answering the questions, but certainly there was a bit of a talk around there are opportunities for kind of youth participation, but it's about making it work logistically for the young people. Paul was speaking a little bit about kind of youth participation toolkit in Tuzla that they use, and kind of putting it back onto like funders and asking them to kind of demand more youth participation, if I've kind of picked that up correctly. And then that gives you much more control, I think, over the process. If funders are regularly kind of expecting something like that to happen, and he was talking about the kind of inspectorate regularly lifting the bonnet off everything and looking for that kind of youth participation involvement. Mine's again was just kind of logistically in terms of like confidentiality and bringing young people together and having them sensitive stories, and how you would kind of, you know, get around that with everybody kind of knowing if all the individuals are coming from the same sort of areas. Like our area is quite a smaller knit area, so yeah, people knowing each other's stories and bringing them together. So I haven't really answered the question as it was, but I was designated as the first feedback. So.
That's okay. It's great to pose new questions when you're asked a question, but it's also thanks, Paul, for putting the toolkit into the box, because always it's helpful to have like actual practical tools to help us in doing that. So thank you, and Fiona as well, putting in loads of things going into the chat box there. Thanks, Dean. Thanks very much. So the next group, who's this designated speaker? Don't make me call you out.
Yeah, is that our group, is it? Fiona and
so, yeah. Go for it then.
Yeah, we just spoke a bit. Yeah, look, we just spoke about, because we said in clear, obviously, you know, we sat in on the ASR with you. So we spoke about other ways we had engaged the young people. So we do surveys every couple of years where each young person would do a survey and they'd fill it in, and some of the questions would be like, how did they find the services going for them? What did they think would change to make the service better for them? Questions like that. And we also then spoke about, we had some 15 French people come over from Fiance here a few years ago for the weekend, or for 2 days, sorry, not the weekend. And we had 2 young people get involved in that as well. And that went very well. So they sat in and they spoke about their stories, their experience of the Health and Force for Youth Service and things like that. And then Fionn then spoke about meetings they have every month called Your Service, Your Voice. So I think I let Fionn speak about that because he spoke very well about it. Over to you, Fionn.
Thank you. I suppose it's always interesting to hear what various teams are doing in different parts of the country. In terms of the Extension Youth Service here, we work with young people in homelessness 18 to 26 in the youth work methodology. So in terms of the opportunities we had, we moved location at the beginning of the pandemic. So from the inception stage of the service, it was very much about integrating the perspectives of the young people using the service into how we laid out the service in terms of both on an aesthetic level, but also on a policy and procedure level. So stemming from that, we developed a Your Service, Your Voice monthly meeting in which the young people of the service have active decision-making powers regarding not only our activity calendar, how they want to see our activity budget used and things like that, but in terms of reviewing the procedures within the service and how the service operates. And we've very much been integrating the values of the agency within that and explaining that end of things. So not only are the young people making local decisions, but they're getting a perspective on the macro operational level of the agency and why we practice in the way we do. Part and parcel of that, though, is about, it has ultimately for us been about trying to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the young people and that it's not a case of we're kind of tokenizing participation. So it's very frequent. It's the engagement of young people comes across a broad bunch of areas, and part of it has been about keeping it as consistent as possible so that young people know that there's a space to engage there regardless if they choose to or not at any given month. So.
There was one more group, I think, was there, Robbie?
Yes, there was a third group.
We didn't pick a designated speaker, but I'll volunteer myself. A lot of what kind of we were talking about was people have reiterated in different ways already, but we kind of, I don't know if I've answered the questions, but we focused in on that interpersonal aspect of it and how young people can feel safe in giving feedback, be it positive or negative, about the staff and the areas and the groups that they're working in. So we're kind of talking about how to create that kind of community rules, and the anonymity needs to be respected, but that there's a space to give regular feedback, not just once a year, but maybe on a monthly basis. And if they have nothing to say, that's great. But at least then if there's something that's wrong, that they know, okay, well, in 2 weeks' time, it's the first Monday of the month, and that's when so-and-so asks me how I'm getting on. So I have a place to, I'm able to say, this isn't going well, or this is something that I need to change. And also that if they express their views and if they are negative, that they need to understand that it's not going to impact the help that they receive, or it's not going to impact their situation negatively. But I suppose that comes down to the staff and the training within the organisation, in making that very clear to young people from the onset that they are part of whatever they are involved in, and they deserve their views to be heard and their opinion matters in that sense. I don't know if I missed anything. Martin, if you want to come in.
No, I think that was everything. I've taken notes as well.
That's a really interesting point in terms of actually training for everybody of how to work together to make these meetings meaningful. That's really helpful. I'm taking notes as I'm talking as well. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to go back to my presentation, which is basically about what we ended up doing. Bearing in mind that this was last year prior to this training, and again, I would reiterate, we would do things maybe slightly differently, which is always really good when you go on a training. But what we decided to have two aspects of feedback in relation to the annual service review, and that was specifically to address the issue of inclusivity. So we knew that there were young people who would not be comfortable to attend the meeting. We knew there were young people who wouldn't be comfortable to attend the meeting online, but we wanted all young people to have the opportunity to feedback. So I think Kieran mentioned it there. We decided to do a questionnaire, and we used a tool that the questionnaire was going to be, it was going to be anonymous, which we chose to do for what we were thinking was to create a safe environment for feedback for our young people. I don't know, would we do that again? Would it be more helpful to actually have people's names? But that's something that we'd need to consider, but that's what we did anyway. And we sent it out via a link so that they would be on people's phones, on the young people's phones, so they questioned, so we kept it quite small. And then we also had a couple of people that we invited to, a couple of young people that we invited to actually attend the meeting. So the questionnaire that we alluded that we sent out, these are the questions that we asked. So it was again quite specific around the service, and the service itself is a Housing First for Youth service. So it's very much around housing and tenancy and providing support around that for young people who are coming out of homelessness or who are coming out of care that have quite complex needs. So we were very specific about what we wanted to hear or what we were asking them about the service. And again, that might be something that we would broaden following on from hearing some of the presentations over the last couple of days. We included us as a landlord. As an agency, we provide support services, but we also, for some of our young people, were their landlords. So we wanted to ask and find out what their experience of us from that perspective was as well. So then the meeting itself, like how were we going to approach this? So the first thing that we did obviously was we spoke to the young people. In doing this, we made the decision that we identified a couple of young people that we felt would be in a position to attend the meeting, who might want to attend the meeting. And we didn't cast a wide net. We asked a number of young people, but they were young people that we decided, again, that might be something that we'd doing it again, that we do differently, but that's what we did. With those young people, bearing in mind that we were also at a stage where all of our engagement was online or on the phone. So we really wanted to ensure that the young person was prepped for the meeting, that they knew what to expect. We were very conscious it could be a quite intimidating meeting, that there was a gang of professionals sitting around talking about very serious subjects, and that, and also that it was online. And where we say there, the agreed method of participation, that was, we gave young people the choice whether they would link in online from their homes without anybody with them, or whether they would come into the service and that their key worker would sit beside them or would set them up in a room and link them into the meeting and log on to the meeting. And then following on after the meeting, we made sure that the young person had a debrief phone call with the key worker. So to ensure that everything went well, to get the feedback on how the meeting itself went, etc. So then the facilitation of the meeting, we made the decision that we would have the young people come in for a section of the meeting and not for the entire meeting. And that was really about our own fear, I think, or my fear around our conversations around the challenges and stuff like that. So what we did was we had the meeting where we discussed some of the challenges and trends, and then we put them together and fed that back to the young person, as opposed to the young person sitting through the meeting. So that was one of the things to negate some of our fears. And the second thing was that for some of the young people, we felt that being online for that length of time might be challenging for them. But again, in retrospect, maybe that was too closed-minded of us in thinking that. But so when the young person came in, we introduced everyone, because while the young person might know one or two people at the meeting, they wouldn't, say, for example, know the senior management or the very senior management, or maybe some of the other project workers from different areas. So we introduced each other and just reiterated the purpose and process. So what the meeting was, what this annual service review, why we were doing it, where the meeting would go, so that the minutes of the meeting were taken, that they would go on to the board, what would happen then. So just explaining the whole process. And then during the meeting, the first step of the meeting was we fed back to the young person who was in attendance. And for some of the meetings, there was 2 young people. So we fed back, we gave an overview of what the feedback of the staff was around the challenges, around the service, about some of the questions that were asked around the service, what could make things better. And then we also gave the feedback that other young people had given us through the questionnaires. So we gave the young people who were in attendance a broad overview of the feedback from the other young people. And then we sought the feedback and suggestions from the young person, both from their own experiences, but also from their thoughts on what the other young people had said and what the staff had given us their feedback and what their thoughts on that were. So I suppose a lot of facilitation skills went into that in relation to making sure that we understood what the young person was saying to us, that we're not just making an assumption around what their feedback was. So there was a lot of reflecting back, taking minutes, making sure that the minutes were correct that we were taking. But at the end of that process, then it was really important to acknowledge the young person's participation. So to acknowledge that it was the first time that we did it, that it might have been a little bit scary, or that it might, whether we met the expectations of them or not in the meeting, but and to thank them very much for being involved and sharing with us their expertise, and to feed back to them that they knew the next steps, and also the potential impact of their participation. So that was really around expectations, but also around possibilities. So saying to young people that actually having your voice at this meeting might really help us to make effective change in a way that we can't as staff members, because we haven't had that experience. And being really honest about that some of our funders are really seeking that voice from young people. So having their voice strengthens our advocacy around things like bigger issues like housing that we can't necessarily change on our own. And then just the impact for us having them participate and trying to make it more collaborative work. So after that, we got some general feedback around having young people engaging in this formal meeting. It wasn't always easy, I would say that. So we did have some quite critical feedback from some of the young people around engagement, around sticking with them. Some really, really beneficial feedback as well when you talk about trauma-informed care, and we're starting to get into that realm, and that the feedback some of the young people gave us was that when they were in the middle of chaos, or when they were in the middle of, say, for example, or they were engaging in highly criminalized behavior or violent behavior, or really struggling to engage with us, what we could have done that would have helped them to engage with us more. Some of that was hard to hear in terms of that, and I was interested to hear about what Anne was saying around challenging, because one staff member we had a young person who was speaking about that they were in the middle of quite chaotic, and every time we would try to speak to the young person and engage the young person was screaming at us or engage, like really abusive behavior towards us, no matter what we were doing at the time. And when she gave her feedback, she said, just, you should have asked me or engaged. And the staff member said, in a very nice tone, I would add, and that's really important as well, but the staff member did challenge to say, well, do you think you would have heard that at the time? Because we tried to talk to you and you didn't hear at the time. And the young person accepted that challenge, to be fair to her, and the young person said, okay, maybe not in that moment, but if you'd tried later that day, if you'd kept, basically the message was keep trying. So that was really, really good. But the general feedback from the staff was that there was an opportunity actually for a lot of very positive feedback from the staff. So we got a lot of feedback that was quite nice to hear around relationships that people had built, around the trust that they had in the service, around things that we were doing right and to continue to do. So very often we're looking at feedback, like constructive feedback. How can we do better? How can we do better? But it was actually really nice to see, well, what are the things that we need to keep doing and not lose in this ever-changing environment. And there was a load of opportunity to learn. So there was really, really insightful, and it was more impactful for the staff team, I think, to hear it from the young people rather, and not just from professionals at trainings like this, but from the people that they actually work with, that there was a real opportunity to learn from them. And it was quite motivating. So the feedback was that it reminded, we have done ASRs for a very long time in the organization, and they had started to feel a little bit stagnant and started to feel like a little bit of a tick box exercise. So having the young people involved kind of made it more of a real, that it might actually make a difference, that there might be change, and it really reinvigorated the review itself. The young people then fed back to us about being engaged, and they said that they felt empowered. They were actually really, what they said was that they were really grateful to have an opportunity to contribute. And we actually got some really good ideas from some of the young people around how we could increase our housing stock or how we could access different types of housing. And that was really interesting. And they felt really listened to and valued, which was really, really good. And for us as an agency, I suppose it was a really, really good thing to do, because it does evidence our own values, like Fionn spoke about there. And it also affirms our key strategy. So it affirms, yes, we should be working towards more and more shared power and collaboration and customer participation. So at the end of it all, having tried it with not doing it in any way perfectly, what are the things that we think that we need to consider going forward in doing that, or things that we need to discuss? Setting the tone is really, really important, and that's trauma-informed care perspective. So ensuring that we're creating those safe spaces for everybody is really important. The power balance, and I think I'd add to that what Anne spoke about earlier in relation to how do we make sure that it's an equal and not just tokenistic. And how can we be respectful of a young person, but still challenge so that it is actually a proper contribution and not just tokenism. That's really interesting when you're looking at the power balance as well. One of the things that we did say is the importance of knowing the young person and the project for engaging, so that there'll be somebody that knows the young person sitting with them, so can support them and help them. So we had a couple of young people that attended that were actually quite shy, or when we're talking, maybe had a reaction, and they had someone there beside them who had spoken to them that they trust, who was able to say, do you remember we spoke about this before, and prompt them to say what they wanted to say or give them encouragement. That was really important. And preparing for it, so knowing that it's going to happen, that was really important or something that we needed to talk about. And then debriefing, so all talking about it. For the staff, the reason that I would say debriefing for staff is when you are challenged, when you're working really hard to engage with young people, and then young people maybe are saying, nobody tried to help me, that kind of debriefing and trying to frame or take what the young person has said in terms of an opportunity for it to be better, as opposed to it being a complete criticism, and creating that kind of context. So debriefing is important for that. Consent is massive of the young person. So continually making sure that the young person is aware of what they're contributing to and their consent the whole way along the way. One of the things around that we did wrong, that I think we did wrong afterwards, was how to thank the young person, or how to, what was the phrase that we used yesterday? Compensating the young person. And we made the decision not to give formal compensation for the ASR. And I think that having heard all of this and thinking about all of this, I think that was the wrong decision, made with the good intention. So we wrote handwritten thank you notes to the young person, describing the impact that they were going to have and the next steps, which other young people were very appreciative of, but it wasn't enough. And it came from a good place, because we were saying we didn't want to monetize what they were doing, but actually we weren't sitting in that meeting for free. So the young people probably shouldn't have been sitting in that in the meeting for free. Then another thing, feedback on outcomes. And then I suppose that fluid and flexible process, that's really important. Sometimes we can get caught into this is the guidelines of how to do it. This is using a toolkit is really, really good, but making sure you're taking what's worked for you, that you don't become really, really stagnant around, or very black and white about what way to engage, that it is a process that's fluid and it needs to be flexible. And that was kind of our experience, like even from our learnings today and our learnings from doing it. Next year we'll do it differently, and that probably the year after that we'll do it differently again. So it does need to be, it can't be over prescriptive in general, I think, was our learning from that. So that's really all that I had to say on it. If there was anything, questions that people would have, or points that people might like to share in terms of what they might do differently, or what they think would be a good idea to take from here.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Being wrong. That's the biggest thing as well. Doing it, getting it wrong, and moving forwards.
No, but I think that's also very important. And it's the whole reason why Fianza started looking at this topic and doing a training is because it is a new area and it's not something that we all do very well. And so I appreciate you stepping in and giving the presentation, and also your honesty to say, actually, we wouldn't do this in the future, or we'd change this, because it also shows, well, there's value to the work that we're doing in this training in the first place. So I personally really appreciate the honesty. Does anybody have any initial thoughts or questions or anything that they'd like to add? You can raise your hand, or you can add a question into the chat box. Oh, and you already have a question, so I'll hand it over the floor to you.
Well, I just want to add to your final point, Lisa, about compensating for participation. When we invited the young people for the storytelling weekend, at first we didn't actually. We decided not to compensate, not to pay, but before the actual weekend, we changed our mind because some of our collaborators were saying, what will they do? They're informants of knowledge. We're co-creating knowledge together, informants. How would it look like if we were paying them? And they said, no, they're not your informants. They're your collaborators. They're collaborating with you. So some of the young people are not able to be paid because of the way that they are giving social benefits, so they're not paid. But the other ones who are on maybe student grants or whatever, then they were paid to participate, and they have been paid to participate in meetings, etc. Not media campaigns, not interviews, not things that's been communication where they've been like a source to communication. But all the other activities, we've paid the ones who can be paid to do it. And I think that signals equality when we do that, when we consider it a job for them, a part of the job as well. If that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna. Kirsten, I see your hand is also raised.
Hi. I was just thinking about, it's always a tough one for us, just because we generally compensate in some way, and sometimes you can be at risk of affecting benefits if you do that in the wrong way. We've found that covering expenses as a volunteer is the way that we've been able to give back to them through vouchers, perhaps for some place. And with that, it's been much more of a gift sort of thing. If there is a concern around benefits, and it's justifiable because they are volunteering their time. But yeah, we're not sitting in those meetings for free, so it's important that they feel like they've, yes, fine, what they're doing from an intrinsic level is really, really important, but actually we're working with young people in poverty, so for the largest part. So I do think compensation is important, but I totally get why monetizing it might take away from that intrinsic motivation. So it's a tough balance. I get where Lisa was coming from, and the same with that. Yeah, we've used vouchers a lot of the time as to be blunt, as a way to get around that, because it's gifting, and you can gift to a clothing shop, from that perspective, or somebody just commented about online vouchers as well.
Yes.
Give supermarket vouchers, but when we had like somebody with addiction issues, they could go buy alcohol with it. So you have to weigh it up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's definitely one of those topics that is maybe a bit context driven. In some countries, there's a benefit system, in other countries there isn't. And you kind of have to, I guess, be a bit fluid with what's possible. Maybe we'll come back to Apollina's comment in a moment. But Monica, do you want to share what you added in the chat box around how you thank your peer researchers?
Yes, so because of the benefit system, we can't actually say we paying them, we can't advertise in any way, but we kind of go around it by saying we can thank you for your time by providing you the voucher. And for the set, so at the moment, one of the projects that involves youth collaboration that we're doing a neurodiversity and youth homelessness research project, and we train young people as peer researchers. So every time they attend a training session, they get a £10 Amazon voucher, and they also get a voucher for refreshments, because in the past, when the meetings were in person, we would buy, my past colleagues would buy pizzas or other refreshments, etc. But since that's not possible, the first thing that came up in our first meeting when asked the question, what could make these meetings better? And they said food, but obviously because we can't provide them with food because they're online, we decided I'm gonna send them a £5 voucher before the meeting so that they can purchase their own refreshments.
Great, thank you for sharing. And Apple, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apollinia, is that correct? Almost. You might have to turn your microphone to correct me.
I think Apollonia had some issues when we were in the group with her microphone, so I'm not sure if she can.
Okay, sorry. So you had the question for Lisa. That you thought it was very interesting. This point of how do you thank young people, and could Lisa elaborate a bit more? I know you mentioned writing cards, but how else do you show gratitude?
Yeah, I think that was for us, that was the whole thing, was that how do you do it? And we landed at that moment in time of sending, obviously during the meeting, we were saying thank you, just saying it, first of all, but also being really clear about what their contribution means to us. So being really clear about, actually for us personally, hearing that is really important, but also then what their contribution might mean to affecting change for other young people, and being really clear and explicit with the young people that their contribution does mean something and what it actually means. That was really important for the thank you. But then there was the other side of this debate that or not even debate, but this conversation that we're having around compensation, paying. At the time, the thought process from us was, if we pay them, will they then feel they have to give us good feedback? And that was our thinking. And so we decided not to monetize it, but actually in hearing all of those things, if we're explicitly saying maybe afterwards, rather than saying, there's ways of maybe around that, rather than telling someone when they're coming on, I'm going to pay you, or I'm going to give you something, that they come on then afterwards, or saying actually what we're paying for, or what we're giving you vouchers for, or whatever that might be, is honesty and authentic, and we really need all of that feedback. And it's no good to us if you just give us the good side. We need it all. So I think from hearing from all of those conversations, things like the vouchers are in an Irish context, because we do have a welfare system, etc., and that the voucher system would probably be the most for these types of meetings. But going forward, if there was something more formal, or there was a way potentially payment. But I think it's very contextual and still something that's spoken, certainly at a European context, it's still being talked out and debated out, and seeing where we stand on it. I think, does that answer your question, Apollinia? And I think respecting the young person as well, just finally, is going back to them and respecting what they've said, and going back to them afterwards and saying, now this has happened, and ensuring that they're getting that it's not just a one.
Perfect. Anna, your hand is raised again. Did I take the floor?
Yeah, well, I just there's two things in Lisa's presentation that I thought was interesting. When you said, Lisa, you were very conscious about the managing expectations from the young people involved. So what can they expect, and what if things are not completely changed next week, then what? And that was actually an issue for us as well, because we were inviting them to share and push for youth perspectives in a political context. So we could not, it was out of our hands what was going to happen with a political proposal of a national strategy to end homelessness. we could not say that this will happen and this will change and you will see more housing in the future in Denmark and all the systems will be changed completely. We could not promise that. But so we were very conscious of saying to them, what we can promise you is that we will do our best to make sure that your perspectives and themes that you are pointing towards and the points that you're making will be given to the right people who have the decision-making power. What they do to it, we cannot promise you, but we can promise you that we will work our best possible ways to feed this into the system and make sure that the people who needs to hear it hears what you have to say. So that was a way of being very honest and transparent and very not very concrete actually, because again it was policy, it was agenda setting. It was trying to make a public debate about young people and homelessness. And then one question that I had that I found interesting. Did you do any like preparation with the young people together before they attended the meeting, or was it like individual preparation? Because yeah, sorry, that was a question.
No, I think that it's a really interesting, you know, we were talking, Kieran and Claire and I share an office, and we were in the office this morning just chatting about yesterday, and we didn't do that. Now I could tell you that it was because of COVID and that it wasn't possible, but actually we just didn't consider it. If I'm being honest, we never even thought about bringing the young people together. And it's actually quite a good idea in terms of that they might support each other. The young people came together in the meeting, but in the terms of the preparation, no, they didn't. So I think that's something that we can consider going forward. Yeah, definitely.
That's one thing that the young people I'm working with, they really appreciated and asked for. It's been before going to the meeting in the Ministry of Social Affairs that I hadn't set enough time to the preparational meeting with them before that. And they were sitting together and discussing, so what is important for us, which messages are important for us to leave when we leave this meeting. So what is important that we talk about, and how can we then take the conversation towards that in the meeting? And that's been really fruitful. But their feedback to me has been we need more time to prepare, not just like half an hour, 45 minutes before going to a meeting. We need more time to find out what's important for us to say when we have this opportunity to speak with some of the people in power.
I'm just seeing if anyone else has any more questions to put to either Lisa or Anna. From my side, I have one last question, at least. I'm interested to know, what was it? Was there a particular reason or prompt that got you interested in going down this route of youth participation or youth collaboration? Anna, you've clearly done a massive amount of work on this, and you've brought in True Colours United. So I'm interested to know, what was the prompt for you to deepen your work there? And Lisa, you mentioned that these annual service reviews are something that have been going on for years. And what was the prompt there to say, actually, we should be bringing in young people?
Do you want me to go first? Okay. Well, the short answer is bad consciousness, because we hadn't been doing it enough and we knew that. And the longer version is that I think because we are the type of organization we are, then we are also, we're not in direct daily contact with young people in homelessness. And that kind of, it can give us a kind of a distance to reality, if that makes sense. So our position and our work as an organization needed to be qualified and legitimized by being in close connection with the young people that we were working for. So it's basically the acknowledgement that we were missing a perspective in our work, and we needed to be in closer touch with the young people experiencing homelessness than we were, to make sure we had the right voice to bring into this policy work for staff, but also in our developing new projects and models and recommendations for that. So it was like testing the recommendations that we would communicate, and we actually changed some of the policy recommendations we had formulated after the work with the young people. Some of them were reframed and adjusted. So qualifying our work and also legitimizing ourselves, because we are the type of organization we are. So we cannot just like sit by the dinner table and ask a young person, so what's going on? And then we were inspired by a foundation that we're working closely with and also living with, and they've done a similar type of process with young people who had experience with living care. And that had a huge impact, that publication and that process in their work. So we'd seen someone doing it in a different way, and we were inspired by that and managed to get some funding so we could do a similar process ourselves.
Great, thank you very much. And Lisa?
I think, like Anne said, their inspiration from seeing other people was a big factor. So the work that I had been doing around with Fianza Youth and youth collaboration and youth participation, as it was then, was coming up, and I could see it in different contexts and different areas and thought that's really interesting. I think that coupled with our shift to Housing First for Youth approach, and one of the key principles is around client or young person driven support, you know, that the young person's voice, their choice. And we were doing that very, very well on an individual basis, but we weren't doing it at a service, kind of at a service level. And I think just a couple of things aligned. And we'd been thinking about it for quite a while. And I think then it just got to a point where if we just don't try it, we could be years waiting before. If we're waiting for somebody, like I said earlier, if we were waiting for someone to give us the absolute, or for a policy to be written or a directive to be given to us from a board to do this, that we might be waiting quite a while. Someone needs to start. And so we just said, let's just give it a go and see what happens. But it really was around the type of service that we wanted to provide as well, in that we want the young people, genuinely want the young people to be at the center of our service, and empowered to be that. And that can't happen if it's just at an individual level. We really want opportunities for them to come in and really have, and we do really want to share that power. How we do that then, it's not as while it sounds lovely here, and we have loads of ideas. We were even talking this morning, myself and Kieran, about what would it look like if young people formed part of our performance appraisals as individual staff, and that would be really interesting. But I know that we're quite a while away from that, but I think that it's about starting it and really getting to that place of sharing the power and putting that into practice, basically. So doing what we say, really.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lisa. I don't think there's any other questions. So what I might propose now is we take maybe I'm really bad at math, less than a 10-minute break. So wherever time zone you're in, if we come back at 5 to the hour, so just less than 10 minutes. And then what we'll do for the last half an hour is there can be a bit of a space to talk about what do people want to do next as follow-ups. Where do you want to take your work with youth collaboration? Is there some sharing that we can do amongst the participants here? Is there a role for Fianza to support you down the line, to organize another event, more webinars, more sharing and toolkits, etc., things like that? So we can touch on that when we come back. So see you all around 5 to the hour. Perfect. So the timing has kind of gone a little bit askew this afternoon, but that's okay. I think it's better to have those types of interactions and back and forth that we had in the last half an hour. A lot of people have actually messaged me to say they have to leave because they have meetings coming up at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, depending on the time zone that you're in. So I don't think I'm going to put us back into breakout rooms again. There's only 10 of us left at this point. So I think what would be interesting, we can do this two ways, either people sharing themselves, or we can do it through the artificial medium of Mentimeter to get everyone's engagement, but it might be nicer just to share in the group. If people maybe shared something that they've taken away from these 2 days of trainings, and something that they're still curious about to learn more. Because obviously I think for a lot of us, and Lisa pointed this in her presentation, even from yesterday, there's a lot of new things that we'll probably do differently. And it's a lot of new information. So I appreciate that on the one hand, you might have learned a lot, but you might have also identified actually, there's a lot more I want to learn. And so from Fianza's side, it would be good to know, what did you find interesting about these 2 trainings? And then also, what would you like us to do in the future? If we did something else after the summer, we're looking at maybe doing another training, hopefully in person, but let's see how things go with COVID after the summer. And if we did something that was to build on this, what would you like to see in that? So I'm just rambling at the moment to give you all time to think. So yeah, something that you've taken away from this training, and then something that you'd like to see in the future. And I don't know if your microphone has started working at Apollonia, but you can add it into the chat box as well if you wish. Kieran, I see you've unmuted yourself. Perfect.
Yes.
I'm ready to go. I actually really...
That's not my voice, by the way.
I actually really liked just what Fionn said about your service, your voice, and maybe implementing that, because we were speaking earlier. We're just going to redecorate the apartment block here, you know, like, and we were trying to kind of put a spin on it of how to get people involved with doing that. So maybe, you know, like your service, your voice, and how to make this building here like a home. So how to make your house a home in line with your service, your voice. I really liked that idea. And Fionn works for Focus Ireland, so it's actually, you know, like it's like you'd think we would know that nearly, wouldn't you? Know, in some way, like you'd nearly have an expectation that you know what's going on within your agency. But like I obviously didn't know that. So and that was like my biggest thing from today, that I thought that was a lovely idea.
There, you can go up and visit Fionn if he'll have you.
I'd gladly visit you all down that direction. I so rarely get out of Dublin, so we'll do an exchange. We'll meet halfway in the middle or something.
And sorry, I didn't catch your name because it's Kieran's name is on the Zoom. Claire. And is there something that you'd like to learn more of?
Yeah, about the groups and about how Anna, just bringing the groups together, because again, this morning we were just saying that we're kind of fearful of that we do great one-to-one work, and we do lovely pieces of work, you know, where we bring people together for Christmas and Easter and that kind of stuff, but you know, the more serious stuff that we don't generally do group work in that situation.
Perfect.
And I'm still scared of it, you know, so I could still have a lot to learn, I think, before I'd want to jump in and do it.
Great, thank you for sharing. Somebody else like to go?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. So I suppose I'm going to start with what I'd love to see bit first, if that's okay. Because I've heard so many fantastic examples here of throughout the 2 days of how to bring around youth collaboration, and in some cases very much in the service level. But something struck me from the conversation in our breakout room, which is how to support young people to make systemic change and to maybe enter that space of collaborative working around policy at the maybe not just the national level, but even at the European level there. It came up in our conversation group. And what I did link in there was the National Youth Council of Ireland's Young Voices platform, which is a bit of a lateral step to the left in terms of it. But I'd love to see something about how you integrate the perspectives and make sure there's really robust collaborative work with young people who are often marginalized at not just a kind of a service level or maybe an agency level, but rather looking for that national and international advocacy and change making. In terms of what I've taken away with today is, I suppose it's for myself, language is something I kind of sit in the back of the mind, but actually refocusing it to the fore and making sure that it really is embedded in all aspects of things and how it's tied into, I think something that was mentioned previously in one of the other day, of how our power as professionals and how we hold on to it at times, even if we're not consciously doing it. So having those two bits spinning in the head of how to challenge the power and the language aspects. So me.
Great, thanks for sharing, Fionn. Anybody else like to share?
I think
Oh, sorry.
after you.
No, please do go, Martin.
I've enjoyed the presentations. I like to hear what other people are doing. It's always really useful. I think it's always really helpful. And to hear exemplars of that, and like to reiterate what some people have said, I think we're all quite good at doing one-to-one work or collecting that feedback or engaging with people in that way. And I think as an organizational, going forward, we're trying to embed that in some way as an ongoing thing. And I think I was talking to one of the assistant directors earlier on about, you know, at all levels of the decision making, to have the question, what do young people think? So whether it's, you know, a contract that comes up, whether it's a commissioned service, whether it's redesigning, you know, supported accommodation, you know, the decorating, and just to have that as a standard question so that it starts becoming natural thing to ask rather than in pockets going forward. I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense, but I'm basically just digesting a lot of what I've heard and thinking about what I can do over the next few months. And we've just initiated a sort of, we've called it Young People Involvement Group just for the time being, and how we progress that and what the format should be and how and when we invite young people into that group going forward. And I think as soon as possible is probably the answer to that.
Perfect, thanks for sharing, Martin. Monica?
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say thank you. It's been brilliant these past couple of days, listening to everyone's experiences. And yeah, I do really appreciate having sessions. I think that's very valuable to learn as well what happens on a practical level, because I feel like, you know, in theory, youth collaboration, it's a brilliant idea. We all want to do it, but how do you actually do it? You know, this kind of, you know, I'm trying still to bridge kind of the gap between kind of the theoretical models and the ideals and the very logistics of doing it, and all the trying to overcome all the different barriers kind of in, you know, when it actually happens in practice. So listening to more case studies will be very helpful. And I'd also like to maybe learn some more tools, kind of like get into the nitty gritty and the details of how it's actually implemented. So for example, just like Anna, when you were talking about the storytelling, you know, sounds like a brilliant idea. And now I kind of want to know more how the day went and what sort of questions maybe you asked and how the process of storytelling was facilitated. Like it'd be great to maybe the next session to be very practical around like the very specific details of implementing certain tools. And another thing I think that we've been slightly struggling with that I'd like to learn more about is how to develop the youth voice, because I think, Anna, as you mentioned, it's kind of like a continuum, and it's very hard, almost impossible to drop the young person to the, you know, very end of that continuum. You kind of have to work with the young person, taking on that journey of developing themselves, developing their youth voice, so that they're ready to then implement that change. And we noticed it with one of the projects we've been doing. So we started a youth action group for young people to kind of feed into our work and influence it. And with the first meeting, we kind of had this idea of like, yeah, we want the young people to lead the group and implement all these changes. But actually, we learned from the first meeting, the young people probably need a bit more support and a bit more development before they can lead some change or before they can lead the group. So maybe hearing more about how you can develop the young people so that they can be active agents of change.
Great, thank you very much, Monica. So I'm just reading your message in the chat box. And we'll also have the recording of yesterday's presentations as well to share, so you can see what was presented from the US and from Canada as well. But it is great to hear that you found the presentations today good. Would anybody who hasn't spoken yet like to share?
I'd like to definitely thank the speakers. They've all been very, very insightful, and it's given me time to reflect on my own practices and also just practices internally. This idea of tokenism is kind of sticking with me, that everything is always last minute when it comes to policy work and government submissions, and it's so easy just to forget about the person who you're supposed to be helping just to get in a submission on time. So I suppose it's about, especially with young people, building up now the groundwork of a group of young people and give them a space to be able to contribute and to get their views and understandings now, so that when something arises, you're ready to go. It's not something you do afterwards, it's something that you prepare now. So that's definitely something that I'll be taking away.
I think you have a very special empathy now, Anna, for tokenism, having the experience of being given 5 days to give feedback on a strategy.
5? Wow, what a that's a long
what a
time.
luxury. Yeah, but I actually think that's something that we haven't spoken about either, and maybe that's something for the future as well, is building in youth collaboration with the stakeholders that you work with as well, because you can do everything right and create your own workplace culture, but like you said, if you have 4 days to put in a response to a national strategy or to be called before a committee, how do you work with young people in that capacity to make sure that they are empowered to participate, but also that when they go into that space, that they're not being tokenized when it's outside of your own boundaries?
There is one thing that popped up in my head that I would like to see maybe in the next meeting or like in some future training. It'd be very interesting as well to have some young people in the training. I'm not sure if any organization, because even our organization, we have some young people that we work with that we might be willing to come into the training and kind of let us know what made their participation in the project meaningful, or how, what made them want to engage, or what could be improved about the project that they were involved in. I think will be very valuable to hear from young people themselves and have the opportunity to ask young people what can be done to make the process more participatory or more collaborative.
Perfect, and thank you for the offer as well. Often that's one of the biggest challenges we face in Fianza around not just youth collaboration, but the, I guess, collaboration piece in general, but all people experiencing homelessness, is that once you introduce people to an international environment, language becomes a huge barrier to be able to do these things correctly. So thank you for the offer, Monica. Anybody else? Anna and Lisa, also feel free to add too.
So you're asking two things, if I recall correctly: takeaways and future.
Yes.
I think for me, there's been a massive amount of takeaway around language, around process, around adultism. This was a new concept to me from yesterday, and it's really after blowing my mind. And I will also admit, not just as a person working in youth services, but as a mother, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah. A lot of takeaways in relation to that. And I think a lot of takeaway that there is really good work actually happening, that we're not where we want to be, but that we're on our way. And I think that's a takeaway, I think, for me as well, that, that we're trying, and there's people out there that can help us. In terms of the future, I think as well, there seems to be a theme maybe around learning how to facilitate group participation or participation in general, but it's more around facilitation skills. And I think maybe bringing in some of the young people, like what Monica's saying there, around what do they want. So one of the things that we're struggling with, I think, is our service. What kind of things can we involve our young people in? And how can we hear a youth voice? Where do we need to hear it? And what kind of things can we do? And even from that perspective, to avoid tokenism. So what kind of things, because we don't do generally many activities. A lot of our work is around individual support plans and direct work. So how can we instill youth voice into the service? But I think so the facilitation skills and the bringing the young people in to ask them about how can we do it and what would work, and or young people who have been, it would be really nice to hear maybe from young people who have been involved in some of the work, the really good collaborative work that's happened, and advice they might give us around that.
Great, thank you.
I'll just add, I think unfortunately I couldn't take part in yesterday's session, but I think one of the takeaways is that this is a growing interest from so many of us. So I'm thinking that there's a movement going on. We're trying to build a movement that strengthens youth collaboration and participation and youth action, as True Colours would probably say, not just collaboration and participation, but actual action. And I think I can't remember who of you said it, but one of the things that I'm struggling with is the how to kind of raise everyone else around us in investing the time and the effort and the resources needed to actually have this good meetings with young people. I mean, some of the things that I've done facilitating some of the meetings that young people were invited to by the ministries, etc., but to try and push a new way of setting up a meeting and telling people quite directly, don't ask the young people to tell them their story, their personal story, because they don't want to tell them their story anymore. They want to talk about what's important, but it's really difficult to kind of raise everyone else around us meeting these young people as well. And I think that's where we have a job to do as a movement, trying to push youth collaboration and participation. Did that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. Definitely. Anybody else that hasn't had a chance to speak yet, or something they want to add?
Sorry, if you don't mind, just kind of adding to what Anna was saying. Yeah, I just really resonated with me when you were talking about it, and in your presentation as well, about trying to kind of rally up everyone around you, around the youth participation, youth collaboration, and how to do it. And I only started this role a few months ago. So when I first tried to recruit young people, I just kind of sent out loads of emails trying to be like, hey, I've got this opportunity. And there were like no replies. And I realized actually to spend loads of time building relationships first with the support workers, with the organizations, having meetings to then get them on board. And then only slowly, when I've built that relationship with the organizations, with the individuals who work with young people, then to be willing to speak to them. But it just takes so many resources and so much time to just find one young person to take part. And I think there needs to be some sort of more innovative ways developed in which young people can be recruited, because it's a big barrier to participation at the moment.
Thank you for sharing, Monica. Anybody else? If not, speak now or forever hold your peace, I guess, as we're coming to the end of the meeting. But what...
Sorry, Robbie, I don't know, did you see in the chat, Appolina put in
no,
a really
sorry.
interesting comment there.
Oh, thanks for flagging. So I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but so I'd like to add from my personal experience as a young person and as an intern in social work and from conversations around the issue, that maybe the most discouraging thing for young participation is the sense of authority from professionals, something that I consider the only solution to this is personal work as an individual, but also teamwork and balance of power. And I totally agree with that. And when you get the recording of yesterday's session, there was a piece around adultism and how the power dynamic and the structures of these organizations does exactly what you spoke of there or what you wrote about. So hopefully that might also be inspiring, because it's an individual thing, but it's also a cultural thing in an organization as well that we need to be cautious of. So in terms of next steps, I will share links to watch back the recordings from the 2 sessions with everybody. I will also send around some of the publications that David mentioned. He had some like, not sure, do you call them cheat sheets or tip sheets or something like that for working with young people with lived experience in a research setting. And we had a few other publications that were mentioned. So I'll get the links to those to share with you all. And I'll keep a list of everyone who participated in this training. I think all of you probably came across this through either the Fianza Flash or through our youth mailing. And so any other follow-up activities that we do, I'll use those communication channels, but I'll also send an email to people who are on this. So if we decide after the summer to do something or to build on, because there were some really concrete things that you all shared at the end that I think would be a very interesting next step in training. So we'll definitely keep you all posted on any further training or follow-up. And unless there's any last comments, I bring the meeting to an end. So thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you joining. I know it's a lot to ask people to join 2.5 hours of screen 2 years into COVID. I think we're all a bit sick of it. But I appreciate your energy and your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robbie. That was
Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Anne.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.